Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's January 16th. Today we celebrate the Spanish Enlightenment priest and botanist who named the Dahlia, and the glamorous movie star who traded in her star sapphire collection for a tractor. We'll learn about the item vintners were selling during Prohibition, and the woman who became the most widely read American garden author in the United States. Today's Unearthed Words feature thoughts on the blackest month of the year, January. And we grow that garden library with a new book written by a 20-year fellow of the Linnean Society. He's the man who began his career as a forensic botanist after getting a phone call from the authorities. I'll talk about a garden item that comes in so handy, especially if you're going to hang things in trees. And then we'll wrap things up with thoughts on the lengthening days. We gain about 2 minutes of sunlight a day right now. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. Here's today's curated articles. First up is a post from Debbie Holland. The post was written on Richard Jackson Garden blog, and the post is called Planting Hope. Debbie said, "When I started working as a professional gardener, I had no idea that gardening could have such a profound positive effect on mental well-being." Debbie emphasizes that gardening requires us to slow down, contemplate, and appreciate the little details in life that can be easily missed. And she offers up this quote by Audrey Hepburn: "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." This post has so many wonderful nuggets about the benefits of gardening. It's why I end every show by saying, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. Anyway, I loved this post that Debbie wrote. And if you'd like to find it and read it for yourself in the free Facebook group, just search for Hope, and this post will pop right up. Next up is a post from Gardens Illustrated, and it features Marks Hall Arboretum and Walled Garden in Essex. Marks Hall Arboretum is absolutely gorgeous in the winter. The Arboretum sits on a 2,200-acre estate in Essex. You wouldn't know it by looking at these gorgeous pictures, but the soil there is clay. Now, the beautiful thing about this garden is that it's been organized into geographic zones. So from an inspiration standpoint, it's splendid. Marks Hall is considered to be a striking heritage landscape, and it's now thrown into sharp relief by the addition of a contemporary lakeside garden. The goal of Marks Hall is to celebrate trees, to promote excellence in horticulture, and to offer a magical space that can be enjoyed year-round. If you're looking for inspiring images of a beautiful winter landscape, it's hard to beat these pictures from Marks Hall Arboretum. If you'd like to check out this post, just type in Mark in the search bar for the Facebook group for the show, and this post will pop up. Now, if you'd like to have access to all of these curated articles for yourself and improve the quality of your Facebook feed, you're in luck, because I share all of these articles and more with the listener community in the free Facebook group, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or search for links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for the Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today is the birthday of the Spanish Enlightenment priest and botanist, Antonio José Cavanilles, who was born on this day in 1745. Antonio was a prolific botanist and probably Spain's first expert botanist. He was born in Valencia, Spain's third largest city. When Antonio struggled to find a job at the university, he moved to France. In Paris, he was influenced by André Jussieu and André Tuat. By the time he was 36, he had decided to focus exclusively on botany. Antonio named over 100 genera. He gave the name Cosmos to the Mexican aster. Cosmos comes from a Greek word meaning harmonious or orderly. When Alexander von Humboldt sent seeds of a beautiful plant to Antonio, he suggested that the plant should be named after Antonio and called the Cavanilles. But Antonio declined the honor and named it the Dahlia after the botanist Andrew Dahl instead. Dahl was Swedish and a student of Carl Linnaeus. Ironically, Dahl never had anything to do with the dahlia. The plant's botanical name is Dahlia pinnata. Pinnata refers to the fact that the leaves are divided in a feathery manner. Now, around the same time, dahlia seeds arrived in Germany, and a botanist there decided to name the plant Georgina after a Russian explorer by the name of Professor Georgi. For decades, Germans refused to call it the dahlia and stuck with the name Georgina. However, in 1834, London Gardeners magazine settled the matter once and for all, declaring that the name would be Dahlia and not Georgina. German gardeners capitulated, and despite being the very first person to grow the dahlia, no dahlia variety has ever been named after Antonio José Cavanilles. The French Revolution caused Antonio to return to Spain. Antonio was 45 years old when he returned home, and he'd already established himself as a respected botanist. At the turn of the century in 1801, Antonio was promoted to be the director of the Royal Botanic Garden. The garden was created by King Fernando VI in 1755, 10 years after Antonio was born. In 1774, 3 staggered terraces were added to the Botanic Garden, along with an iron gate that surrounds it. A greenhouse was constructed, and decades later, it would become Antonio's professional home. During Antonio's lifetime, botanists were beginning to classify plants using Carl Linnaeus's classification method. Not every botanist agreed with this, but Antonio was quick to jump on the bandwagon. Under his direction, the Madrid Botanical Garden became the center of botany for Spain and Europe. Antonio Cavanilles died 3 years after becoming the director of the Botanical Garden. His early death prevented him from finishing his book on the plants of the garden. It featured descriptions and drawings of the main species at the garden. Many were the fruit of the great scientific expeditions of the 18th century. 4 years later, after Antonio Cavanilles died, Napoleon would invade Spain, and the botanical torch would be passed to England and France. Spain's botanical golden age was over. Today, the Madrid Botanical Garden is home to over 100,000 plant species and roughly 1,500 trees. And it was on this day, 100 years ago in 1920, that Prohibition began in the United States, and many people became interested in learning about fermentation as a result. You might be curious to know how vintners handled the challenge of prohibition. Well, instead of making wine, they made wine bricks. Wine bricks were essentially grape concentrate. Some cities and towns even went so far as to ban wine bricks. The city of Richmond, Virginia banned them, and in an article from 1931, it said, "The Attorney General had to do his duty. The law does not differentiate between the person who buys wine bricks for the delicious fruit juice in them and the person who maliciously tampers with them in such a way as to make a forbidden beverage. No chances must be taken. Every Virginian must be protected against himself." Wow. Well, wine bricks were marketed as a way to make your own grape juice. But of course, everyone knew the real reason for the wine brick market. And there was a little slogan that became popular during the wine brick era. It went like this: "Hick, hick, here's the brick with the kick." And today is the anniversary of the death of the movie star and homesteader Carole Lombard, who died on this day in 1942. Carole died tragically when her plane crashed shortly after taking off from Las Vegas. 3 years earlier, just before the premiere of Gone with the Wind, Carole had married Clark Gable. As newlyweds, Carole and Clark had bought a 21-acre estate just 40 minutes outside of Beverly Hills. Instead of living glamorously, they turned the estate into a working farm. Carole had sold her Star Sapphire collection to fund their dream. She set up all the crops they would grow, and she worked long hours on the ranch. They had an orchard and citrus grove, a dairy, a vineyard, and the farm produced peaches, grapes, oranges, lemons, walnuts, apricots, hay, and alfalfa. They used the alfalfa they grew for feed. They sent their grapes to the local hospital. The Farmers Association marketed their citrus crop. And many biographies mention that Carole and Clark raised turkeys for MGM to use at its commissary. Carole bought Clark a tractor, and Clark enjoyed taking care of his 2 prized racehorses and cattle. To top it all off, Carole and Clark called each other Ma and Pa. They were really and truly living a farm fantasy. They even used kerosene lamps in their living room. They loved their simple life together on the ranch, and Carole loved growing things. And today is the anniversary of the death of the American gardener and garden writer Louisa Boyd Yeomans King, who died on this day in 1948. At the age of 26, Louisa married a wealthy man from Chicago by the name of Francis King, which is why her pen name was Mrs. Francis King. Louisa learned to garden from her mother-in-law, Aurelia. Her mother-in-law lived in a large estate, and she had a huge garden and an impressive garden library. In 1902, Louisa and her husband moved to Michigan, where they built a home called Orchard House. With the help of a gardener by the name of Frank Acne, Louisa began to plan and create her garden, and she also began writing about her gardens. Soon she was giving lectures, contributing pieces to magazines, writing columns, and organizing garden clubs. She even became friends with prominent gardeners of her time, like Gertrude Jekyll, Charles Sprague Sargent, and the landscape architects Fletcher Steele and Ellen Biddle Shipman. Louisa learned to garden during the heyday of American garden culture. And her garden writing in newspaper columns and magazine publications made her the most widely read American garden author in the United States. For Louisa's first book, The Well-Considered Garden, the preface was written by her dear friend Gertrude Jekyll. In 1915, when the book debuted, it was considered an instant classic in garden literature. Louisa would go on to write a total of 9 books. The garden estate, known as Blythewald, has a copy of The Well-Considered Garden. Their particular text also contains a handwritten inscription along with Louisa's signature. The inscription borrows a quote from Sir William Temple, who said, "Gardening is an enjoyment and a possession for which no man is too high or too low." Louisa changed the quote and wrote, "Gardening is an enjoyment and a possession for which no woman is too high or too low." In 1922, House and Garden magazine dubbed Louisa the fairy godmother of gardening. We know that the garden photographer Frances Benjamin Johnston was a fan of her work because she donated her entire collection of Louisa's books to the library at the New York Botanical Garden. Louisa helped start the Garden Club of America and the Women's National Farm and Garden Association. She held leadership positions in both organizations. When her husband died suddenly in 1927, Louisa was forced to sell Orchard House. She moved to Hartford, New York from Michigan and bought a property she called King's Tree. This time, she set up a smaller garden. The smaller size meant less work, which better accommodated her writing and speaking commitments. When Louisa died on this day in 1948, her ashes were scattered at King's Tree. It was Louisa Yeomans King who said, "Each has his most real thing. Mine is the garden." In unearthed words, today's poems reflect on the harshness of January. The winter months can be agony, if for no other reason than the biting cold. Thus the saying, "The blackest month in all the year is the month of Janvier." Another piece of winter lore says, "As the days lengthen, the cold strengthens." January and February are the coldest months of the year and the toughest for many people to get through. It's no wonder that people have vented their feelings about these 2 cold months through poetry. Here's an excerpt from A Spring Carol by Alfred Austin, the English poet and poet laureate, from his Soliloquies in Song. "Where hast thou been all the dumb winter days, when neither sunlight was, nor smile of flowers, neither life, nor love, nor frolic, only expanse melancholic, with never a note of thy exhilarating lays?" And here's a quote from John Burroughs, the American naturalist, from The Snow Walkers, published in 1866. "What a severe yet master artist old winter is! No longer the canvas and the pigments, but the marble and the chisel." And here's an excerpt from The Glass Child by the author Charlotte Erickson. "It's January, and I'm kicking snow off the ground. I just threw out the flower you made me promise to water, handle with care, because I was too careless, you said. careless with things and people around me and behind. And I remember being still for just a second or two, thinking that it's so much easier to leave and start anew than take care of what's already here. And here's a quote from the French author Sidonie Gabrielle Colette, who was nominated for a Nobel Prize. January, month of empty pockets. Let us endure this evil month, anxious as a theatrical producer's forehead. And here's Dirge for the Year by Percy Bysshe Shelley, the English Romantic poet. January gray is here, like a sexton by her grave. February bears the bier. March with grief doth howl and rave. And April weeps, but O ye hours, follow with May's fairest flowers. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Murder Most Florid by Mark Spencer, brand new out this past year. The subtitle to this book is Inside the Mind of a Forensic Botanist. Mark is a passionate plantsman, and he's a champion of plants and the study of botany. He's also passionate about connecting people with the natural world. Throughout his career, Mark has created a niche for himself as a consultant botanist who specializes in forensic botany as well as the history of botany. Murder Most Florid is a book where Mark shows us how plants and the environment can actually help investigators solve crimes. Now, Mark didn't train to become a forensic botanist. He became one through an accidental event in his life. It started with a phone call asking for help with a murder. Forensic botany actually goes back to the early part of the 20th century and was memorably used to convict the kidnapper of the Lindbergh baby. Murder Most Florid is an enthralling first-person account that follows Mark's unconventional and unique career, one that takes him to woodlands, wasteland, and roadsides, as well as police labs, to examine the botanical evidence of serious crimes. Mark's botanical knowledge has been crucial to securing conviction, and Mark's book shows us how the ancient lessons of botanical science can still be front and center in our modern DNA-obsessed world. And before I forget, let me just tell you that there's a fantastic video podcast of Mark presenting to the Linnaean Society, where he's been a fellow for over 20 years. Mark is an honorary curator at the Linnaeus Society's herbarium. He's worked for over a decade at the Natural History Museum in London. In this presentation, Mark talks about the book and his work, and I thought it was fascinating. If you get a chance to watch it, you really should. I've created a link to it in today's show notes, and I've also shared it in the Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. And here's today's great gift for gardeners. It's a 5-pack of the really big tree branch S-hooks. These are the metal hangers or hooks that you use for hanging bird feeders or baskets or plants, lanterns or ornaments. They're black, and they're the really heavy-duty ones. They can either be the 12-inch size or the 23-inch size, and they can hold up to 35 pounds. You can get the 5-pack of the 12-inch type using the link in today's show notes for $13.99 on Amazon. And I appreciate it because it's one of the ways that you can support the show. So thank you. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Despite the fact that we're in the middle of January and it's so cold and our gardens are buried under many feet of snow, the days are getting longer. The good news is that the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, is behind us. It took place on December 21st. In January, each day gains about 2 minutes of daylight. In February, we gain about 2.5 minutes of sunlight each day. Here are some thoughts on the lengthening days by the English poet, novelist, and garden designer Vida Sackville-West. The shortest day has passed, and whatever nastiness of weather we may look forward to in January and February, at least we notice that the days are getting longer. Minute by minute, they lengthen out. It takes some weeks before we become aware of the change. It is imperceptible, even as the growth of a child, as you watch it day by day, until the moment comes when, with a start of delighted surprise, we realize that we can stay out of doors in a twilight, lasting for another quarter of a precious hour. The next winter solstice will take place in the Northern Hemisphere on Monday, December 21st, 2020 at 4:02 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.